Let's talk about the victims ministry. This is a really interesting ministry, and I get lots of questions from people about why are you running around with police? Why are you working with prosecutors? Why are you going to crime scenes? The reality, the answer to that question is because God has called us to go out into the world and meet Satan face to face and rescue the victims, people who are suffering, right out of the grasp of what's going on. How better can you do that when you are working to rescue women and children, senior citizens and disabled persons who are suffering day in and day out, that they have no hope, they have no thought of how they can escape their situation and have a better life. We're talking about sex trafficking. We're talking about child pornography. We're talking about men taking 12-year-old girls as wives and kidnapping them to be their wives and then dumping them in the streets like garbage once they're pregnant. We're talking about parents who sell their daughters for sex so the family can eat. We're talking about children being sent out into the street to beg money in the middle of traffic while mom and dad are at home doing nothing. We're talking about women who are at the point of committing suicide because they suffer abuse from their husband or their father or their brother, or girls whose uncles and or teachers or neighbors are raping them, and they can't tell anybody because they're under the threat of being killed. They have no hope. That's what you have to understand. We call this the dark side of ministry because we're dealing with ugly, horrible realities every day. And it isn't easy. And the only way that we can do this is to stay close to God and to have a lot of people praying for us. It's dangerous. I've had death threats for the work that I've done. We've had 4 times where people have actually tried to assassinate me for rescuing victims. And the thing is that it's one of the most beautiful ministries that there can be, because you're going into these deep, dark places. This is what Christ has called us to do. He has told us to go out into the world, to go meet the suffering face to face. And these places are so dark, so far away, so lonely, so much so without hope, that if we don't go, if we don't bring Christ to that victim, they will die. They have no hope. They will continue suffering. And so, let me share with you a couple cases from which you'll see pictures. There's Anna Carolina. I received a phone call from the police one day. They didn't have a car. They didn't have a car, the police. They could not go to the crime scene. They didn't have a camera to take crime scene photos. And they called me and they said, Gracie, please, get in your car right now. You need to take us to Guaymaca. A woman, her husband just machete murdered her in front of her 3 children. And we get there, and there's Anna Carolina face down in the dirt, still bleeding, 30 minutes after the event happened. And I'm sitting in a little white plastic chair holding her 8-year-old son, who's crying, and he's telling me and showing me where he hid so his stepfather wouldn't murder him too. Talking to the mother of this young woman, Anna Carolina, talking to her mother, or trying to, because her mother was catatonic. We had to take her to the doctor. It's ministering the love of God in the moment of crisis when there is no hope. It's being there in those moments where if Christ doesn't show up, nobody is going to make it. There's cases that we've had. I could talk to you for hours about cases. There's Myra and her daughter Litzy. Myra was doing drugs. She was out in the street. She was sleeping with men. She was leaving her children alone, and her newborn baby died because she was alone and it got tangled up. She was out. They left the children alone, and it got tangled up in a mosquito net. And we went in and we took all of her children away from her, the other 4 children, and they went to INFA, and we worked with her. And she accepted Christ, and she became a good mother. And she only sold vitamins and Tylenol and ibuprofen and the little blue pills in the streets to support her kids, but she became a good mother. And right after this, we discovered that little Litzy, who was only 2 years old, had cancer. She had a Wilms tumor. And we worked with that family. And this is a family that has nothing. A woman who was abusing her kids, neglecting her kids, turned her life around. And we paid for every trip for Litzy to go to the hospital, do her chemotherapy. And eventually, Litzy died of cancer. She died 2 years ago on the 5th of July, 2010. But we were there with her. And Litzy loves Jesus, and her mother loves Jesus, and the family loves Jesus. And it's just a testimony of how you go into those dark places and you can turn somebody's life around. And there's so many stories that I can tell you about. There's the 18-month-old little girl that her stepfather beat her, raped her, and murdered her. And her family was so poor that when we got to the house, they had her 18-month-old body doubled over in a casket for a newborn because they didn't have enough money to buy a casket for a toddler. There was no food in the wake there in the house. We bought food. We were with a grandmother, and we were with her sister and ministering to them. We've dealt with kidnapping cases where the mother's 15-month-old child was kidnapped, and we prayed with the mother, and we've been there with her. And let me tell you, this is a miracle job. This is a miracle job every day. We're seeing lives change. We're seeing lives saved with this victims ministry. And nobody can tell me that this is not a ministry that God's involved with. I've been there. I've seen what he can do. Let me go back to Anna Carolina, and I'll end with this before I talk about Marco. Anna Carolina's husband was in the jail cell outside my office in the police station, and I brought a pastor to him, and he accepted Christ right there in the jail cell, right before he went off to spend the rest of his life in prison. And he truly did accept Christ, because police reported to me the next day that at 4 o'clock in the morning he was begging and crying to Christ to forgive him, that he was sorry for what he had done. And then there's cases like Marco, who's a mentally retarded 22-year-old man who's like an 8-year-old little boy. And a man just tries to grab him and rape him and murder him with a machete, and his one arm's cut off, and he's got another cut here and another cut here. And authorities won't do their job. Nobody's interested. It's too difficult. He's in the hospital. They got to do their stuff. And we get the ball moving. And I called the police in Tegucigalpa, and I got them to help us with the case. And within 48 hours of giving the case to the Special Crimes Director in Tegucigalpa, because here in Tolunga they didn't want to do the work, in 48 hours they had captured the man who had done this to Marco and sent him off to jail. This is a powerful ministry. This is a ministry where God steps into the darkness, where God steps into where Satan is, causing suffering, and that he's using us to be a light. He's using us, not just salvation of souls, but salvation of lives too. Both of them. Hope, bringing hope to victims. They joke in the streets and they say, the men don't beat their women because the gringo will send them to jail. That's me, the gringa, Gracie. You know, they say that men don't rape little girls because the gringa will send them to jail. That's powerful stuff. And people know that, you know, when they have no hope, someone will say, go call Gracie at Heart of Christ. She will know what to do. She'll have help for you. This is a ministry that they know that God is in charge. Heart of Christ. That's Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane at the rock, feeling the oppression of the world so hard that he's sweating blood. And the thing is if this ministry isn't here, people will die. People would have died. We have saved lives. We have rescued people. The other thing that we do is witness protection. There is no witness protection in this country. And we've had 4 cases in which the authorities have brought us somebody to keep them safe. One just a couple weeks ago, a woman and her baby and her mother. She witnessed her husband murdered. She witnessed her sister-in-law murdered. Her mother-in-law was murdered, and these same people were looking to murder them. And they had no place to go, but God brought them here, and here they were safe. And this is all I can say. Just look at the pictures. Look at the pictures and know that every single one of the faces that you see there is someone whose lives was changed. Someone where God went into the dark places and rescued them out of their great suffering.